I am really delighted to have our fantastic keynote speaker here today from California, and we have the pleasure of having a Minnesotan, John Frederick, introduce Janice Lin. And John has been acquainted with Janice for quite a while, and so he will do the honors and do them very, very well. And I just want to say about John Frederick that he was a key partner in Silent Power, the company in Minnesota that was the world's first company to offer a UL-listed energy storage system utilizing lithium-ion battery technology. And John has been involved in this company and a large number of other companies during his illustrious career, and I'm sorry, I need my glasses for this part, and has degrees in electrical engineering from Iowa State and business administration from the College of St. Thomas. So you can read the rest about John Frederick in his bio in the program, and with that, I'll turn it over to John Frederick.
Yeah, thank you, Ellen. I have the pleasure of introducing today's keynote speaker. But before I do that, I'm going to take you back in time, and it was July of 2009, and I was attending the very first Storage Week conference in San Diego, and that was a full week's worth of energy storage. It was very early. I had just joined Silent Power in December of 2008, so this goes back a while, and it was the very early days of energy storage. Silent Power's focus was utility-controlled, behind-the-meter energy storage that you'd aggregate and use as a grid resource. And we were there at the conference to talk to potential partners, battery manufacturers, and other industry participants. I vividly recall I was riding down the escalator at the conference and a voice called out behind me. It was Janice Lin. And Janice was starting up CESA, and if you haven't heard of that organization, it's the California Energy Storage Alliance. And she wanted Silent Power to join. So Silent Power, I don't know, we had to be one of the early members. We weren't number one, but I think we were the top 10 or early 10. And for the next 5 years, through CESA, I watched Janice work with the California Public Utilities Commission, the California Legislature, the Governor's Office, CESA, which is our MISO in California, and the entire energy storage industry to reform California's energy storage policies. And some great work came out of that effort, including a $2 per watt energy storage rebate that's part of the self-generation program, which is funded $83 million per year in California for behind-the-meter energy storage. CESA was absolutely instrumental in the implementation of the landmark energy storage legislation, AB 2514, that requires the utilities in California to procure 1.3 gigawatts of energy storage. And I could really think of no other single person that's had more influence on California's energy storage policy. Janice is also no stranger to Minnesota. In 2013, the Minnesota Department of Commerce commissioned a value of energy storage study. Janice's firm, Strategen Consulting, was awarded this contract, and the report was published in late 2013. And that is on the Department of Commerce website, and I encourage everyone to take a look at that if you haven't already. That report, the findings of that report, and actually having watched Janice move California forward in a positive way, actually caused me to get involved with an effort here in Minnesota, and we introduced 2 bills this last legislative session. House File 1320 and Senate File 1178. to create a 50% energy storage rebate here in our home state. The key elements of those bills actually passed both the House Energy Committee as well as the Senate Energy Committee, but unfortunately with some of the turmoil in the final days of the legislative session did not pass out of conference committee, but came very, very close and enjoyed bipartisan support. Janice brings several decades of experience to the clean energy strategy, market development, corporate strategy, through Strategen Consulting. After founding the California Energy Storage Association, Janice has also founded the Global Energy Storage Alliance, an international nonprofit, and currently serves on the board of directors and chair of the executive committee. I mentioned that she started CESA. She's involved with also an energy storage conference. I would recommend that if any of you have the chance, attend. That's the Energy Storage North America Conference, University of Pennsylvania, and a BA in International Relations from the University of Pennsylvania College of Arts and Science. She's the winner of ESA, which stands for Energy Storage Association, which is a national organization, 2013 Phil Simons Energy Storage Award, and the NAATBATB, that must have a name, 2014 Market Development Award. So really, we're very, very fortunate to have Janice here from California, and really encourage you to pay attention to her comments. So please join me in welcoming Janice Lin.
Thanks so much, John. Can all of you hear me? Is that okay? I like to walk around. So yeah, that was fun, this little walk down memory lane, and I just want to thank all of you and Ellen and John for inviting me here today. I mean, it's such a pleasure, especially after the study that we did for the Department of Commerce in the fall of 2013. It's interesting, that walk on memory lane, that when I started all of this, I don't know, 6 years ago, I had one business card, oops, and it just dawned on me that storage people are kind of like storage assets. You need a lot of different value streams, and then it really works. And now I have 4 business cards, so use me as your battery example. I also have a storage joke for you. So since we're on this theme of storage jokes, how much does a dead battery cost? Anybody? It's free of charge. So lame. Okay, so it's probably the worst joke in the world. But so I have this whole super long presentation prepared for you. But just listening this morning, it's occurred to me that in addition to this, there's 3 myths that I specifically want to debunk during my talk. And one, that is storage is too expensive, and we're going to talk about why that myth needs debunking. 2, that maybe storage is just this thing that's used for renewable energy integration. Now granted, that is a very important use case of storage, but not the only one. And then the 3rd myth that I've heard, not today, but in a lot of other places I've gone, is like, oh, all that progress in California, just because you have all those liberal Democrats and Jerry Brown. And I want to debunk that too, because the thing is titled Energy Storage Power System Game Changer, but I'll let you in on a secret. Storage is just a tool in the toolkit. The actual game changer is all of you. And storage is a really handy tool in the toolkit. And you don't have to be Jerry Brown to be a power system game changer. It can actually be anyone. And I'll have some examples for you. So some of the things that we're going to talk about, I think John did a great intro about my background, so we won't spend any time on that, very little time. But I want to talk about why storage is a key tool in the toolkit and can help change our electric power system fundamentally and for the better, for ratepayers, for the environment. We'll give you a quick update on all this crazy stuff happening on storage in California. Ellen specifically asked me to share some lessons learned and what that might mean for Minnesota. Now, we did this white paper a couple years ago, but by all means, I would not say that I'm an expert on Minnesota or the Minnesota grid, so that's why I say I want to open the dialogue for implications, because, again, you guys are the game changers. And really, at the end of the day, it's my objective here today is to encourage all of you to become a champion. And you've got some great role models right here. So, okay, so we talked about those three things that I do, lots of different hats, a little more about Strategen, our consulting work, all types of large companies, small companies, utilities, governments. CESA, yeah, 2009, I think John was like our 5th member. We're now up to something like 88 member companies spanning the entire ecosystem in California, and it's taken on a life of its own. And if anybody wants to learn more about our activities, and we welcome people from outside of California to join. You don't have to be a California company. Happy to talk about that further at the break. Today, we're just scratching the tip of the iceberg. The role of energy storage is vast, it's broad. We have an entire 3-day conference dedicated to the topic of energy storage that's happening this fall in San Diego. You will hear from folks like Pedro Pizarro, who's the president of Southern California Edison, a large utility that's buying many, many hundreds of megawatts of storage right now because he says it's cost effective. So I encourage you, if you don't believe me, come to our conference, hear it from him. CESA is a nonprofit. We've established it to share best practices and foster education and collaboration on storage. And with that, I'm going to go right into why storage is a game changer and why I think all of you should add it to your toolkit. So over the last 6 years, we've really evolved our messaging on storage because we realize when you start talking about VARs and volts and sinusoidal wave shapes, 99.9% of the percentage of the population glazes over and they stop listening to you. So how we talk about storage in California, especially in Sacramento, is that it uses a time-tested tradition. It's a lot like making jam. In California, we're like one of the fruit baskets of the country. All the fruit ripens at one time of the year. You can't possibly eat it all at that time, so most of it would go to waste. But hundreds of years ago, they decided, let's take that fruit, stick it in a jar, add some sugar, cook it up, and oh my gosh, then you can eat this fruit anytime you want. We're storing it, and once you store it and put it in a jar, that fruit, not only can you eat it whenever you want, but it becomes more valuable. And that's exactly what storage is doing in the electric power system, is we're taking energy, storing it up, and now you can use it whenever you want, and it becomes much more valuable. So in California, the big deal is we're bottling wind and sunshine. But again, that's one of the things I want to debunk because that's not the only thing you can do with storage. So this idea that it truly is a key tool in the toolkit to change our power system in so many ways that's good for ratepayers, good for the environment, good for industry, and good for creating jobs. One thing to point out, probably everybody in this room has interacted with 3 or 4 different storage devices since you woke up this morning. You've got one sitting in front of you. You've got one in your pocket with your smartphone. I've got a couple right here. You got storage in your car, in your home. So it is literally all around us. What's the innovation is how can we use storage in the electric power system? This is just a subset of the companies active in storage in California today. You can see lots of them are not California companies. So it's creating tons and tons of jobs all over the state. So this is another message that we talk about in California. So, one of the big deals that and assumptions is like, wow, if we add more and more renewable energy, that's the big deal in California right now, it'll be wasted. But the truth is, as we said, we can bottle renewable energy, great application. You can match the production to demand, energy shifting. This is being done, so we talk about making jam out of sunshine. And there's a few examples of that where this is happening today. So in Germany, I think there's about 15,000 behind-the-meter storage systems in operation right now, primarily at homes, actually. And what they're doing is they're storing up the solar energy that's generated, and they're using it later at night. The economics make sense because the feed-in tariff in Germany is now super low. The electric tariff is high. and the combined cost of the solar and the storage, it just makes sense to use it at home. We call this self-consumption. That application is very active in Hawaii and Australia today as well. Doesn't make so much sense in many parts of the domestic United States because of our tariff structure. Another example, this has nothing to do with renewable energy. We call it bulk peaker replacement. This was one of the applications that we studied in California that had a very, very positive benefit to cost ratio. Virtually all the scenarios that were run, the benefit to cost ratio exceeded 1, so it was deemed cost effective. How does this work? Well, basically, and this is conceptual, and if you want, you can go back and look at all the numbers, but the idea is instead of putting in new gas peakers, that's the dominant status quo generation technology of choice, it's cleaner, we said, well, what if you put in storage instead of this new peaker? And typically, peakers provide just a few hours of energy for part of the year. They're not run very often. They spin. While they're very clean, while they're spinning and waiting to go online, they produce a lot of pollution. When they have to produce variable generation, they produce more pollution. So the idea is, how do we compare these two? And these are some of the dimensions that we looked at. Siting, installation speed, what their flexible range is, the capacity factor, the services they provide. So I'm just going to click through really quickly because we don't have a lot of time. But first thing about storage, this is an actual project in San Francisco. There are, literally those are the locations. I think there's about 80 locations, several megawatts of peaking power, customer sited. So that is providing same services as a peaker, and our nearest peaker to San Francisco is, I don't know, like 20, 25 miles away. So the ability to site this close to load is very, very helpful. Secondly, storage can go in a matter of months, like, from conception to installation, under 2 years, whereas a combustion turbine or a CCGT, multiple years, a lot longer, and anytime you talk about a longer lead time, there's more risk. Storage is much faster. So the status quo technology in LMS 100, gas peaker, it can respond maybe in 10 minutes to a signal from our independent system operator, whereas a fast responding storage, it could be a flywheel, a battery, the response is instantaneous in less than a second. So that quicker response means that you don't have to provide as much services because you're more accurate. And there's lots of studies on why accuracy is better. Less pollution, and you just have to buy less of it. Finally, storage has much larger flexible range. A gas peaker can go from 50 to 100 megawatts. Again, it's slow, takes 10 minutes. But if you had, let's say, 100 megawatts of storage, you now have 200 megawatts of flexible range, and 100 in each direction because you're charging or discharging. That kind of range can be very helpful to a system in adding flexibility, which is something that's in great demand when you have a lot of variable generation, for example. Utilization. Part of the reason that storage was found to be cost effective in California is because it can be used 95% of the time. Not doing the same thing, but when you add up all those benefits as compared to a gas peaker, which is really only used, less than a third of the time, that's why you get the benefits to cost ratios look so attractive relative to the gas peaker. So just to summarize, peakers takes a long time to install. Storage can go in really quick. Peaker does one thing. Storage can do many things. Storage is a lot cleaner, especially at the local level. There's a lot of environmental justice issues. Not many people want to have a gas peaker in their backyard. And another big deal that I didn't mention that is probably not such a big deal here, but is a big deal in California, is fossil fuel plants use a lot of water. Storage doesn't have to use any, pumped hydro excluded, of course. So the picture I'd like to leave in your mind, some of our status quo resources, we need them. I'm not saying get rid of them, but they're kind of analogous to the typewriters of way back when. They just did one thing, whereas energy storage, it's kind of like your laptop. You can run spreadsheets, do word processing, play some games. You can be using it all day long. So while on a cost basis, this technology may be more expensive per unit, the value is much, much greater, and it's worth it. So another assumption, it's not viable. Storage is not commercial, it's on the cusp. not viable. Well, the truth is, energy storage is actually being deployed all over the United States. So here's some examples of news releases. A lot of these are merchant projects that are being developed, and these projects, without subsidy. So, 60 megawatt projects, 6 megawatt projects. AES has almost, I think, close to 300 megawatts scheduled to be online. And these systems are providing merchant services. We have another example. This is what I call our first validation of cost effectiveness. So Southern California Edison, they were actually required by our Public Utilities Commission to buy at least 50 megawatts of storage as part of a local capacity procurement. When the dust settled and the bids went through, and this is what I call our first true test of cost effectiveness, because it was subject to an all-source request for offer, so storage had to compete against every other resource type, from gas peakers to demand response and energy efficiency. This very rational utility ended up announcing they wanted to buy 5 times their requirement. Why? Because it made sense. It was cost effective and it was lower risk. I'm going to talk more about this in the update. But after this happened, the question of, is storage viable? Is it commercially ready? Nobody even talks about that anymore. And now it's like, okay, it's cost effective. Where else can we use it? So that's my quick summary on why storage is a game changer. And I know you have this card system on questions, but if anyone has a quick question as I'm going through, just raise your hand, because I don't want anyone to be confused.
Why is a California storage requirement in terms of power and energy?
That's a great question. The reason was our Public Utilities Commission didn't want to be too instructive to utilities on how they were to use it. So different applications have different duration requirements. The local capacity requirement, that had a 4-hour requirement. Other applications, like our behind-the-meter storage, the SGIP program, their incentive program, that has a 2-hour requirement. Other uses, like frequency regulation, maybe 15 minutes is enough. So they wanted to give enough latitude to the utilities to decide where it made sense and where it was cost effective. So that's your short answer. Okay, so California. Why does it make sense to pay attention to California? Sometimes the state does super crazy things when it's our energy deregulation, but they do some really cool things too, especially in the realm of clean energy. It is the home to some of the world's largest geothermal plants, PV projects, wind energy projects, and most recently the world's largest lithium-ion battery project. That's also Southern California Edison. The other thing, California, I'm not here to say that California does everything perfectly. I think we're just a little bit crazy enough to try new things. So I encourage you to look at what's being done there as a learning lab, because there's certainly things that California does that you do not want to do. But what's been interesting is in 2013, John mentioned our storage bill, Assembly Bill 2514, which required our commission to open a proceeding to determine if a procurement target for storage was viable and cost effective. And as a result of that proceeding, that's how we got the mandate. So the legislation did not mandate storage, it mandated a proceeding. But once that happened and we got this energy storage target, a lot of things have happened since then, and that's been kind of cool. And that's another reason why I'm here today, because I think all of you can start making things happen also. So, so some of the things that are advancing storage in California, there's certainly the legislation. I call it the nudge. I don't think other states need to have legislation. There's lots of ways you can nudge and focus on storage as a new resource, but that's just the pathway that was decided on in California. We have a lot of power plant retirements. Once through cooling plants, our Southern California nuclear power plant was shut down. So we have a large need for new capacity. So that's driving procurement of storage. We have a lot of reforms that are happening in our independent system operator that's making storage, making it easier for storage to plug into our markets and more cost effective. And so that's all headed in a good direction. We have an incentive program, and right now we're starting to take up the question of rate design, because the rate design definitely directly impacts the value proposition of behind-the-meter storage. We are very lucky to have Jerry Brown, our 2-time governor, actually 3-time from way back when. And in January, Governor Brown announced some really ambitious clean energy goals. We spend a lot of time in Sacramento, and the general feeling now, it's not if these goals will be achieved. They will be achieved. The question is how. So that's what's happening in our legislature. There will be an increased renewable portfolio standard from 33% to 50%. We're going to reduce petroleum use in cars and trucks by 50%, increase the efficiency of buildings, and reduce emissions by to 40% of 1990 levels. And this is all by 2030. And in an electric power system planning horizon, that's like tomorrow. Because when you think about the lead time in doing all this, one interesting thing is when you look at all these goals, every single one of them, storage has a role. And so it makes for some very exciting times these days. Oops. Okay. Of course, there are the skeptics. Our leading newspapers say, well, if you're going to build all that renewable energy, where are you going to put it? How can we handle these challenges? It's going to be really hard to manage that energy. So this is kind of the dialogue that's happening. And our independent system operator is saying, well, you want to go to 50%, but in April of last year, we already have negative pricing because we've got so much renewable production at certain times of the day, we know where to put it. So this is data from the CESA, and this was just presented at a GHG workshop by the California system operator, and this is the forecasted curtailment in 2024. So this is at a 40% RPS. So this is a system model. You can see that's a lot of curtailment. That's a lot of wasted renewable energy. And what I find really interesting is CESA's solution was target energy efficiency, increase storage and demand response, enable economic dispatch of renewables. How do you do that with storage? Decarbonize transportation fuels. One of the ways you do that, electric vehicles, storage on wheels. So retrofit existing power plants. How do you make existing power plants more efficient? You add some storage. So you see a common theme here. There's a really big role for energy storage to help us achieve our goals in California. So just really quickly, who has not heard about AB 2514 and the resulting mandate? Just anybody? Raise your hand, don't be shy. Okay, at the time when this bill first came out, literally the whole world thought like California had gone crazy, and the question was, is it, even the regulators after they did this, they're like, Janice, are people even going to show up when this procurement happens? Like, is this going to happen for real? It was really an experiment because it was so early. And I know a little side history, if anybody wants to know, maybe at the reception I'll tell you the story about how all this came down, but it was actually a bunch of women that made it happen in California, starting with Governor Brown's staff attorney who wrote the bill, Nancy Skinner, who authored the bill, the advocacy group, me, who helped champion the bill, and then the regulators that implemented the bill was Carla Peterman and her chief of staff, Julie Fitch. But anyway, they came out with this, Carla and Julie, and that's the framework. They prescribed a certain procurement target over time for each utility, and she said, we don't know what the status is of the technology, so you just have to install it all by 2024. So pretty generous. What's really exciting, I'll just go to this one, is we just got through our first procurement, and between the storage rulemaking and our local capacity and our self-generation incentive program, we're actually like 2x of what the target prescribes. Like, we are making some serious progress here. And in no small part because of the process that was used and the subsequent support that we got from utilities. I would say California utilities are now the biggest champions of storage, bar none. So that's why I say come to ESNA and come hear it from Pedro if you don't believe me. One of the things I did want to mention, and I have like a whole hour talk just on this slide, but the thing that was really not well known was the system benefits. Because often we look at projects, energy projects, in a microcosm. What's the ROI? What's the actual cost and benefits of this project? But one of the beautiful things about storage is when you add this flexible resource into the system, it enables all your existing assets by taking the volatility out of the system. It enables those existing assets, fossil fuel assets, coal plants, nuclear plants, the T&D system, to operate a lot more efficiently. So they save money in terms of fuel, unit starts, and they also produce fewer GHG emissions. They also, well, in California's case, will help reduce curtailment. So our firm undertook a study, it was the first one ever, of like, what is the system impact of adding a little bit of storage? And we looked at 3 cases. This is the case that modeled the impact of our behind-the-meter incentive program, which, you know, when it's all built out, probably it's going to be like 0.5% of our total generation capacity in California. That reduced 3,000 unit starts on an annual basis and reduced the forecasted curtailment of our 40% RPS scenario in 2024 by 8%. So bottom line is a tiny bit of storage makes a huge, huge difference. And then we looked at the AB 2514 1.3 gigawatt target. That's maybe 1.7% of our generation capacity. Huge reduction in unit starts, huge reduction in curtailment, and we said, well, just for yucks, what if we doubled that target? And the benefits, you can see the benefits start to diminish, but it's still a positive benefit. And this was, until we did this study about 2 months ago, nobody had ever done it before. And this is a sort of front and center and part of the dialogue of the new legislation that's being discussed in California. And if you want more information about that study, happy to send it. I talked about this cost effectiveness test from Edison, and I just want to talk about this for 1 second. This was an all-source RFO for local capacity. Typically, what they would be buying is gas peakers, but this was open to all resource types. They got, I don't know how many thousands of offers, but almost 1.6 gigawatts of storage was offered in this RFO. They only had to buy 50 megawatts. So this like kind of killed the question of, is the industry going to respond? Is it viable? It's viable. And these were really a broad range of small companies, big companies. Of those 1.6, you know, I don't know, like less than a quarter was customer connected, and the rest was grid connected, so connected on their side of the meter. And what they ultimately selected were these winners. And what's interesting is half the winners of the 260 megawatts, half the winners were like customer sited and the other half were utility sited. So interesting new models that are being introduced. I'm going to skip over because I have 7 minutes left. But the only thing I wanted to say about this program, the self-generation incentive program, we worked really hard. It took 3 new bills to get storage into this pre-existing program. Now that we're in there, it is the most popular technology, and it is the fuel that's getting storage projects built. It's getting solar contractors to learn about how to install storage. It's getting experience on utilities and how to interconnect this stuff. So this program has been super strategic for California, and thanks to our governor, it was just reauthorized for another 4 years. So I'm going to skip over the net metering. I want to get into the lessons learned, because this is what Ellen wanted me to talk about. And this is the simple formula. Leadership plus focus and collaboration equals progress. And the leadership that, you know, every single person in this room, the fact that you're here, you're doing it, thank you. And, you know, I just tell everybody, like, you know, this is so cool. This change, this is the biggest thing to happen to the electric power sector since Edison. You know, I mean, it's huge. And to think that it's happening in our lifetime and every single person can really have a profound impact is really incredible. So my motto is, what you focus on is what you get. You just have to focus on the right stuff. And it just takes a handful of people who take it upon themselves to do something different, learn about the issues, and do something different in their day job, or change their day job. And I can't emphasize that more. Focus. So, you know, probably the greatest thing that Jerry Brown gave us through that bill was focus at our Public Utilities Commission. Because until then, storage was at the Public Utilities Commission. It was like priority 55 in every proceeding. We had a smart grid proceeding, an RPS proceeding, you know, and everybody wanted to look at storage, but it was so buried in the bottom, no progress. But thanks to AB 2514, we got our own rulemaking, we got focus, and this is the process, that resulted. And that process where all the stakeholders now had to focus on storage. What are the applications? Where do you put it in the grid? Is it cost effective? How do we look at cost effectiveness? And so that kind of focus and stakeholder engagement is really what turned around our utilities and repair advocates. So some of the best practices, we already talked about leadership, stakeholder engagement. I would say number 3, system analysis. So we developed some really amazing tools. Some of those tools were used in the Minnesota study to evaluate the cost effectiveness of customer-sited storage here in Minnesota. So they are recyclable. You don't have to start from the beginning. In terms of policy design, I think that technology neutrality is really important. We don't want to pick winners over losers. And if you incentivize the service you want in a way that's cost-effective for ratepayers, well, that's what you're going to get. Consistency, really hard to build a business if the policy changes year to year. And finally, sharing and leveraging best practices. And that's why we started our conference. So on the open dialogue, you know, Minnesota is a very exciting place. It's very different from California. And so that's why I wanted to come back to debunking this myth about, well, it's just big in California because we're implementing all this renewables. Well, you know, so you got some really good renewables going on here, but you guys have a lot of coal generation, gas generation, nuclear generation. Okay, there's one thing I want you to take away. Bacon. Who likes bacon in this room? Anyone like bacon? I know so many vegetarians that like bacon. Well, here's the point. Storage is like bacon. It goes well with everything. You got bacon donuts, bacon on burgers, bacon in hot dogs, you know, bacon in dog food. And so storage, because it's a flexible asset, some of the leading developers, GE, you know what GE is doing? They're going out and they're installing storage on all their gas peakers all over the country. Why? Because when you put storage at the gas peaker and you let the storage be the responding fast, flexible resource, then your gas peaker can operate so much more efficiently at a better heat rate with fewer emissions, and it makes sense economically. So just think bacon, storage bacon. I need to update this because I learned that you have so many more projects here. But I just want to point out that the DOE database is a great resource. This is a project that we operate for the Department of Energy. It's free, it's vetted. You can slice and dice the data and you can look at what's happening all around the world. We talked a bit about the white paper. So I want to say a couple things about the white paper. So we were hired to look at the cost effectiveness of customer-sited storage in Minnesota. And I know I'm totally out of time, but here's the deal. Like, I know you debunk the storage is too expensive. No, it's not about the technology costs, it's about the benefits. And true that, you know, the use case of just looking at storage on the customer side of the meter was not cost effective. Why? Because the tariff structure in Minnesota, you guys don't have humongo demand charges like we have in California. But if you could take that same asset, stick it on the customer side of the meter and let the utility control it, and also let that storage asset provide services to MISO, now we're looking really good. And this, you know, that's above that red line there means the benefits exceed the costs. The ratio is greater than 1. That's really attractive. So that might be an interesting thing to build on for here in Minnesota, and how can we use this fast, flexible asset? I got 30 seconds left. So, okay, and I want to debunk the final myth, because all my storage advocates are like, oh, you're so lucky, because now there's like 12 advocacy groups around the world. And they say, you're so lucky, Janice, because you had Jerry Brown, Nancy Skinner, and all these people in it. Yes, I do feel very lucky that we had these amazing visionary leaders, but reality, you know, like anybody can be a storage champion. And I want to introduce you to Lon Huber. Lon is like an inch bigger than me. He looks younger than me. He is younger than me, but he looks a lot younger than me. And we just hired him, so he's a new director at Strategen. But prior to joining us, he worked in the Consumer Advocates Office in Arizona. Arizona is not known as a legal stronghold, And because of LON, Arizona now has a procurement requirement. So when APS buys new capacity, they have to look at storage, energy efficiency, DR, and if they decide to buy a new gas peaker, well, 10% of that capacity must be storage. That's real progress, and LON was a little peon in this big cause. So point is, you don't have to be Jerry Brown to make a difference. And it takes a village. That's you. And I just want to say, when I got connected to Ellen, I think it was Randy in my office, he's like, Janice, you got to talk to her. She's a kindred spirit. You guys are so lucky to have her here. And so between Ellen and all of you, I can't wait to see what's going to happen in Minnesota. Happy to be here. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, please visit all of our websites and come visit us in San Diego in October. So thank you. Sure.
Fantastic. Oh, I'm back on. Hello. Okay, I hope I don't make your microphone act funny. But anyway,
I'll go stand over there.
That was fabulous. And Janice, we really want you to come back to our state fair where you can have chocolate-covered bacon, bacon ice cream, bacon on a stick. You'll love it. We have some really great questions and not much time. So maybe I should just read them all three quickly, the three of them, and then you can sort of pick and choose how to answer, how to integrate them together. So one question, all of this is viable at the price of electricity in California. How about the price of electricity in Minnesota, which is somewhat lower? What, 12 cents? What's the going rate? 13 cents, 11 cents, something like that.
10.
10 in some utilities? Okay, thank you. Second question, what should the policy priority be? And I think the questioner is asking in what sort of venue? The RTO, the ISO, state legislation, PUC, state executive branch, which was most important body for changing policy in California. And then finally, sorry, this is a lot of questions. You mentioned the creation of jobs. Can you talk just a bit about the type of jobs and if you're tracking their development from all the work that you're doing?
All great questions, thank you. So the first one on electricity prices. So one of the things we've learned in all of our modeling is energy arbitrage, and like the energy savings for moving energy from one time period to another is the lowest value of storage there is, truly. So the good news is, it doesn't matter that much. Even in California, we don't make storage projects pencil out on energy shifting ever. It's really the capacity value. So using storage for capacity, it's using it for market services, distribution deferral, and that was one of the findings at the white paper, and that distribution deferral value, very location specific. Part of the reason our San Diego utility, San Diego Gas and Electric, I forgot to mention this, even before the storage rulemaking, they were out there buying this stuff and rate basing it for distribution application. Why? Because they got a ton of rooftop solar and they got voltage problems, and they just decided this was the most cost-effective way to fix their grid. So I would say don't get too focused on energy prices, because that's the lowest value of storage there is. And it's the other values that really make the technology sing. And of course, to really understand those values, that's why you need to work closely with your utilities and get them on the same side of the table. So, and that gets me to question number 2, which is what is the appropriate policy forum to create that nudge? And one thing I've learned in California is utilities hate mandates. The M thing is like a 4-letter word. It's stricken from my vocabulary. I don't even talk about that anymore. We talk about goals, and whichever agency here in Minnesota is situated to bring those stakeholders together to have a dialogue about what should our goals be. Because you only want to deploy storage when it makes sense anyway, right? We're not doing this for storage's sake. We're doing it where we can lower cost for ratepayers, clean the air, make the system more resilient and robust. You need utilities to figure that out. And goal setting is a great activity. Nobody gets to college unless you say at an early age, I want to go to college. You need to have a goal about that. Doesn't matter what college you go to. Same thing with storage. You just have to have a goal collective goal-minded attitude. So maybe the nudge needs to come from your legislature. Maybe a forward-thinking regulator can just open a proceeding to focus on it. Doesn't have to be legislation. And what was the third question? Jobs. Yes. So that is one area where we need to ante up our game. So I have a survey in place with all of our CESA members to try to determine headcount for jobs created in California. The solar industry is much more advanced in that regard. But one of the things I will point out, several companies are headquartered. There are tons of large international companies, Samsung, Panasonic, they all have offices in California. They're all selling. I know I got it done. And last comment, the distributed storage projects, they get built right here. So if you can use storage to add that flexibility to your grid, I mean, that's like all kinds of jobs, line worker jobs, electrician jobs, construction jobs, planning jobs, permitting jobs. The National Fire Protection Agency is getting on board. They're like in the process of developing a first responder safety program. So it's like jobs up and down the ecosystem. And those are good paying jobs that are right here in your backyard. Thank you.
Let's thank Janice. That was fantastic. And Janice will be